Brahmabhuta platform. So Srila Prabhupada. Brahmabhuta prasannatma na sochati na kankshati. Let me just check and see if I have that. So this is the Brahmabhuta prasannatma. Brahmabhuta prasannatma na sochati na kankshati. He doesn't worry too much about anything. He's always happy and situated in the mode of goodness. Happiness means that one no longer has to think of attaining things. This is Srila Prabhupada's definition of happiness. Now, what is Socrates' definition of happiness? The definition of happiness is to understand supreme absolute truth by gathering knowledge. Knowledge is the main. Knowledge and goodness are the same. With knowledge come all these qualities, values. And with these values and with attaining that knowledge, I can be happy. Prabhupada says, happiness means no longer having to think of attaining anything, not wanting things, not wanting to attain anything. In this situation, he brings up the example of Prahlad Maharaj. When Prahlad Maharaj sees the Lord, he says, Swamin kritarthosmi varam na yache. He says, having seen you, my Lord, I do not want any material benediction. So the Lord is offering him benediction because he's seen him face to face. He says, Prahlad, take something from me. And Prahlad says, no. Having seen you, I don't want anything material. So Brahmabhuta Prasannatma, he's always happy. A person in that platform is always happy. He wants nothing. Na sochati, na kankshati. He doesn't want, he doesn't desire. He's just happy. So Prabhupada goes on to explain, the karmi, he hankers after wealth, women, and power. The jnani, he wants to become one with God. He's always try to get to a point where he can become one with God. And the yogi, he's looking for all these siddhis, animala guna. He's looking for all these magical powers where you can shrink, you can grow, you can get from one place to the other. These are all the magical powers he wants. But then what's the purpose of all these powers? Prabhupada actually says, oh, what is the point? You want to fly in the sky? Birds fly in the sky. Why do you want to be a bird? It's the quality of a bird. Is a bird a higher, superior being? Is it a superior power? No. The ability to fly is not a superior power. The ability to be small, be big. How are they superior powers? The most important thing is to understand who you are and what is your position here and where are you headed. All the rest of it is you're still playing with material nature, he says. And that's not where we want to be. So going on, Socrates attained Brahman. That's what we've understood. He understood the overall Brahman philosophy. He got to a point where he understood Brahman. But the disciples are asking, could he have also attained Paramatma and Bhagavan if he kept going like this? I mean, basically he was put to death. But if he didn't, and in his ripe old age he kept on going, do you think he could have attained Paramatma realization? And Srila Prabhupada says, yes, up to Paramatma it is possible. He would, just as we've discussed in the previous slides, we can get to a point where the yogi, he sees Krishna in his heart. So there's Paramatma, right? Paramatma realization. He can get there. But he says, to attain Bhagavan, he needs to be able to do devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada explains this very beautifully. He says, to attain Bhagavan, he needs to be able to do devotional service. And to do devotional service, it's going to be difficult because he doesn't know what it is. He doesn't understand it at all. He has no sense, no perception of who God is. What is his form? What is his likes, dislikes? What does he want? How do I treat him? There's no understanding of anything. So how is he going to get there? He says, the Bhagavan realization, the personal abode of the Lord, where you can express yourself with Bhagavan realization, is reserved only for the bhaktas. So for people like him, Bhagavan realization is not possible. The disciples look into Socrates' philosophies and they again say, Socrates believed in the role of a guru, as he taught to so many, even though he had none. He had no guru, but he doesn't say don't have a guru. He even explains, remember in the previous slides, he explains that when he talks about his philosophy, the midwife concept, where the teacher prods, encourages, and in that way, the student, the soul, individual soul, continues to think and ponder and then becomes self-realized, right? So there is a purpose there for a teacher. And Srila Prabhupada says, this is the Vedic principle too. To learn, one should approach a guru or a spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada says that is the process. To learn, one should approach a spiritual master. And if he does that, then he will be able to attain the truth. Tat vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevya upadekshanti te jnanam jnanina sattvadarshina. So he says, what should you do? Approach a spiritual master. Then serve him with humility, ask relevant questions, and because he knows, he will be able to share with you the truth. The spiritual master sees the truth, says Srila Prabhupada, because he's at the point where the Lord is in his heart and he's guiding him from within. He will be best situated to help you on your path too, because he has access to the Lord, and that's what you need. A good spiritual master, says Srila Prabhupada, will guide and encourage the student to think and develop their understanding, because this is the natural path. Guru, Shishya. He will encourage him to develop his intelligence so he can go back home, back to Godhead. So a good spiritual master is like a personal GPS. That's what I say, He's with you, you take, so I found it very personally, very real. It's an awesome realization for myself, because when I first started driving, and do you remember in the olden days, about 10 years back, GPSs were not so easily in the cars, on the phones. There used to be a device that you had to attach to the car and then drive around with it. And sometimes you'd forget to attach to the car. You'd get in, or you'd forgot to plug it, and it'll die out. And it was always my personal fear that if the GPS goes and I'm trying to get somewhere, I'm lost. This is not a country where you get on, stop, get down and find someone and say, hey, how do you go somewhere? There's a different method of doing it, and I was new and it was very scary. But most of the time I was driving either to temple and back or on temple service. So as I was doing that, I realized that my guru is my personal GPS. Because when the GPS, like if I take a wrong route, I miss a light, or I take a right turn instead of going straight, it will immediately find me another route to get back on track. It'll keep me going towards my destination. And that's also the tendency of a guru. No matter what I do, the guru is constantly maneuvering me back on track, depending on my nature, my psychology, my personal tendencies. A guru will tailor-make the process so that I, being myself, can also come and join the mainstream of everybody heading in Krishna consciousness. So it was a good realization for me personally, sharing with you. A good spiritual master will guide and encourage the student to think and develop their understanding. He will encourage him to develop his intelligence for the purpose of going back home, back to Godhead. So Srila Prabhupada says, how do we go back? Very simple. Man mana bhava man bhakto. Always think of Krishna. Always think of Krishna. And how do we always think of Krishna? Srila Prabhupada says, live in such a way that we are always thinking of Krishna. Act in such a way that we have to always think of him. Fill your life with these opportunities, these tasks, these endeavors that require us to keep thinking of him. So without Krishna consciousness, I found it very important, that's why I highlighted it. Without Krishna consciousness, we as people will always remain in the mental platform, always hovering. Like it literally, it sounded and felt like ghosts, but that's the whole concept. You're hovering, you're not stabilizing or settling down, because the mind's juggling. It's always accepting, rejecting, accepting something else. It's a very busy machine that's always working on something or the other. And if we're always accepting and rejecting, then we're constantly fluctuating. But once we're fixed on Krishna, we are not subjected to the mind's fluctuations. So he says, if you can just keep your mind fixed on Krishna, then over time, this process will become automatic. Right conduct will then become automatic. Yes? Ask the disciples, and he says, yes. As soon as the mind wanders, bring it back to Krishna. Bring it back to the sound of the Mahamantra. We say this every time in the morning Saturday classes when we do japa chanting. It says, bring the mind back to the mantra. How many times have we heard that before? And this is what Srila Prabhupada is explaining. It's not just when you're chanting in the morning, when you're doing your Brahma Murta japa. It's also the concept of bringing us back to Krishna every time in our lives. As we live our lives, as we run through our day. This is yoga abhyas, the practice of yoga. Give the mind ample opportunities to keep coming back to Krishna. The mind by nature will waver, wander. It will accept, it will reject, it will fluctuate, it will ponder, it will refuse, it might find something better. It's constantly looking for distractions. But our job is to keep bringing it back to Krishna. And after some time, the habit will become an automatic reaction, the mind itself. When the mind, which was once our enemy, will become our friend. Socrates did not compromise his convictions and ended up facing the death penalty. So they were like, This is what happened. He refused to compromise his convictions, so they killed him. They put him to death. And what do you think, Srila Prabhupada? Srila Prabhupada says, it's good that he stuck to his point. It's important to understand that the society in which he lived at that time, there were no independent thinkers. They just followed the norms of whatever was put in front of them. And because of that, he was obliged to die. Srila Prabhupada says he was a great soul that appeared in a not very advanced society. So it's just a sad thing that he was obliged to die to support his philosophy. One note that I noticed, and which was interesting, was that Socrates never wrote anything. All we know about Socrates' philosophy, we know from the other works that were made after him. They presented his ideas, and very interestingly, in the form of dialogues, mainly by three people: Plato, Xenophon, and Aristophanes. Plato being his disciple, and Xenophon and Aristophanes are the philosophers who wrote about his philosophies. And this is where we collect most of the information. Researching into that and wondering why Socrates never wrote any books, the feedback that I got from the system, from what I read, was that in those days, Socrates valued dialogue more than written. He valued the idea of verbal dialogue more than a written record of concepts. So for him, writing was not a priority. And that's why we don't see him having any books. So that was Socrates. Interesting, right? So Srila Prabhupada covers the philosophies of Socrates, and along with it, he talks about Krishna consciousness. The next person he covers three people. Remember, I said Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. We're on Plato. So Plato, he lived from 428 to 347 BC, and he was the chief student of Socrates. He wrote. Socrates did not, but he wrote. He founded an academy. He founded the Academy in Athens. It was the first European university. And he also wrote a book, Republic, which was one of major works on political theory. So Plato did a lot of work. He built on what Socrates gave, but he also did not quite completely take Socrates' philosophy. Let's see what happens. There are a lot of striking similarities between Plato and Plato's philosophy and the Bhagavad Gita. But where he made mistake, or where he erred, was in his conception of the soul and the goal of education. So Plato got a little distracted. He kind of lost his way along the way. Let's see Plato's philosophy. Plato says that to enjoy harmony and prosperity, a society. So Plato's concepts were not very religious, but more analytical and logical. So if you see his points and philosophies, they are basically his speculation based on what he saw around him in a logical and unemotional way. He says to enjoy harmony and prosperity, a society should place people at an occupation according to their natural ability. So whatever is a natural ability, that should be your work. And that kind of society should be led by somebody who's very wise and good, a wise and good man, a philosopher king. This is one of his concepts. Srila Prabhupada says that sounds just like our varnas, right? Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra. These are our four varnas. And these divisions came about because of the three modes, Sattvagun, Rajagun, and Tamagun. Everybody has a little bit of the three modes in them. And depending on the combination of the three modes, we end up becoming more suited to one of the four varnas. The varna hierarchy is basically that the top are the Brahmanas. So varna hierarchy basically means on the top there are the Brahmanas. They are the thinking parts. And they are the thinkers. They are the ones who like to. They are spiritual leaders. They're thinkers, and below them come the Kshatriyas. They are the protectors. They are the ones who fight the wars. They run the kingdoms, and below them come the Vaishyas, and all the way down at the bottom, the Vaishyas are the ones who are the mercantile class, and all the way down are the Sudras, the laborers, who just run on a day-to-day. Their focus is basically on their immediate needs, and they're basically a labor class. So in that way, there is a varna hierarchy, and in that hierarchy, he describes them as divisions of the body, the Brahmanas being the head. Brahmanas are the head, and then we have the limbs, the arms, the legs, trunk. So we have all of these four varnas fitting in as parts of the body. So Srila Prabhupada says it's pretty much like his understanding is pretty much like our Varnashma system, Varna system at least. And he explains the Varna system. He goes on to see modern society is not like what was planned in Vedic society. See, he says, this Varna system is perfect. It was given to us by the Supreme, and it's a perfect concept. But in today's society, we have gone against it. And he says, what are the biggest problems with today's society? He says, one is industrialization. By industrialization, we have started to take advantage of the underprivileged and the lower classes. We end up using people. Industrialization has ended up in us using fellow people. A lot of problems have come from that. And the other thing it says is the running of slaughterhouses. So killing as a business, killing animals as a lucrative business is another reason. These are two reasons why modern society has gone very, very far away from Vedic society. It's not following any of those rules anymore. Today's rulers, says Srila Prabhupada, are not religious. They don't even know, they say they're religious, but they don't even understand why they shouldn't slaughter cows. They don't understand what needs to be protected. So Srila Prabhupada says, without this understanding, how can they be good rulers? He says, this Varnashma system, this Varnam, Chaturvarnyam Maya Srishtam, Bhagavad Gita 4:13 is what he pulls out. He says, Chaturvarnyam Maya Srishtam Guna Karma Vibhagasha Tasya Kartaram Apimam Vidya Kartaram Avyayam. So according to three modes of material nature and the work ascribed to them, the four divisions of human society were created by me. And although I am the creator of this system, you should know I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. He says, I created this for you and you should follow. So this Chaturvarnyam is great, but Plato, look at what Plato did. Plato gets close. He has no idea about this. He's just looking at society and making decisions. He says Plato divided society into three. One group he called the guardians. They are the ones who govern. They're men of wisdom. Then there's another group called the warriors who protect. And then there's artisans who perform services. They are obedient and they work only to satisfy their appetite. They don't think much. Srila Prabhupada says this division that Plato has made, he's divided it by the modes. He hasn't divided it by the Varnyam that God has created, but he's divided it by the modes. He says the three modes, Sattvagun, Rajogun, and Tamogun. This is how he's divided them. The people who are wise and who govern, they're usually in the mode of goodness. And the warriors are in the mode of passion. The artisans are in Tamoguna. So that is how it's divided. Plato based it on what he found to be man's threefold qualities of intelligence. Threefold qualities of intelligence, courage, and appetite. He noticed people had these three things: intelligence, courage, and an appetite. And based on this, he split them up. He said, these three qualities are qualities of the soul. Because everybody has it. He misunderstood and thought these three qualities are qualities of the soul. Srila Prabhupada says that's where he made the mistake. So this is a mistake. The soul does not have material qualities. The soul is pure. It only dresses in different qualities as per its contact with material nature. So he has confused the dress with the person. And not being able to understand the simple fact that we are not the body shows that he has much lower intelligence. So compared to Socrates, whom Srila Prabhupada feels as a Muni, Plato seems to have, in a way, got confused. His understanding. So this is the challenge of individual introspection. Without support, without guidance, when you start to introspect, there's a very good chance of you losing your way. And this mistake he makes, he thinks that the soul has these qualities, the qualities of the three modes. Plato considered that man was marginal. He was between matter and spirit. So he thought if man is between matter and spirit, both matter and spirit should be developed. So he put a lot of emphasis on developing the body. So when he planned education, Plato thought about introducing a lot of physical activity, exercise, all this he started adding into education. He wanted education to help a student find his natural position and find his moral goodness by working in that way. He said, find moral goodness, find his natural position, and he'll be okay. Srila Prabhupada says, no, moral goodness is not enough to satisfy the soul. When you say moral goodness, he says the mode of goodness. As long as we can get people to the mode of goodness, they'll be happy. He says that's not what the soul wants. The soul, the highest perfection in the material world, is the platform of goodness. Since Plato knows nothing else, he stops there. He says that platform of goodness, that's where we need to be and everything will be great. He says, no, this is not the highest perfection for a human. For a human, he has no idea there's another platform. It's the transcendental platform. And reaching that is the highest perfection for a human. Because Western philosophers do not know of the Vasudeva platform, even on the platform of goodness, they are not even fully good. He says they do not know the Vasudeva platform, therefore they think goodness is the max. And even on goodness, they have not reached Shuddha Sattva, transcendental goodness. They've just reached basic goodness. And that goodness is also polluted with the lower modes sometimes. He says this understanding is not right. To get to that platform of Shuddha Sattva, says Srila Prabhupada, you are required to perform very strict austerities. He talks about the austerities that a bachelor will have to perform, a celibate would have to perform the restrictions and all that. And in that process, he says it's very challenging. It's very difficult to follow. He says a brahmachari would also observe celibacy. And because he followed the directions of spiritual master, his mind and senses would be controlled. The brahmachari would beg alms from door to door, and whatever he earned, he would give to his spiritual master. So it's a very controlled, regulated, restrictive lifestyle. And he says, in the age of Kali, it's very difficult to perform. These austerities are very difficult. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he gave us the process of taking to Krishna consciousness directly. And how is it? By simply chanting the Mahamantra. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so merciful, he gave us the Mahamantra. He said, just by chanting and following the 4 regulative principles, we can ascend to the platform of Shuddha Sattva. We can get to that transcendental platform. We don't have to go through the process of. So Plato, let's look at Plato. Plato has this system of education where he devises from birth to 20 years of age. He thinks of all these processes. So for the first 3 years, he says the child should play and strengthen his body. 3 to 6, he should learn religious studies, 3 to 6. And then from 7 to 10, gymnastics. 10 to 13, reading and writing. From 14 to 16, poetry and music. 16 to 18, mathematics. And then from 18 to 20, mandatory military drill. 20 to 35, he has a choice. If he has scientific and philosophical tendencies, he can stay and remain in school and continue learning. And if not, if he's a warrior, then he should join in military exercises and continue in that way. So this is how he's dividing the education program. And he says this program is applicable to everybody. So Plato's understanding basically is that if this type of education will help the person reveal what category the person belongs to. He said every person has a mix of the 3 modes. This much he understood. The 3 gunas in them, and these 3 things, remember he said it's part of the soul. He got confused that the 3 modes are part of the soul. It's not, but he understood that there are 3 modes acting. And he says these mixes are different. But how are we going to find out? You can't look at a baby and find out what his tendency is. It takes time. So if we expose him to all this, if we develop the spirit and matter, develop mind and spiritually and physically, then in the process, we will find out what his tendency is. And when his natural tendency comes out, then we will be able to put him in the right place. And it will not come out unless he tries everything. Srila Prabhupada says, you're wasting time. Such a system wastes time. A person with a particular disposition should not have to learn the things he's not disposed to doing. I smile when I listen to this because this is what we do in schools too, right? We enforce a certain system. This mandatory, compulsory, up to the point of, I think, almost 6th grade, we enforce. And then from that point, we segregate and we start giving children, slowly we start giving choices to find things that they really like. And then it comes out. Srila Prabhupada says, if Plato had recognized that the mix of modes is there in each person, he should not have standardized education. Previous vasanas decide a person's tendency, not body parts. So this is page 20. In this, the point being said was that he says, some people have an aggressive disposition. They're courageous types governed by the heart, by passion. And some people are inferior, simply wanting to feed their appetite. This is Plato. Plato says these people are animalistic and he believed that they were governed by the liver. So with no idea of where the modes are coming from. He says this is, they're very into eating and their own appetite. So it must be from the liver. And Prabhupada said, this is not a perfect description. Everybody has a heart, a liver, and other body limbs. Whether one is in the mode of goodness, passion, or ignorance depends on one's trainings and the qualities he acquired in his previous life. It's not because of the organs in his body. And according to the Vedic process, says Srila Prabhupada, we can identify it at birth. We don't have to wait, because these are tendencies that come from the previous lifetime. And he comes down to he moves on to astrology. Let me see if I covered that. See, the 4 classes are recognized, says Srila Prabhupada, by their symptoms and qualifications. So selection should be based on the symptoms and qualifications. At birth, we can recognize these symptoms and qualifications, so we put them in a certain category. How is that done? Through astrology. Astrology can determine the tendencies of a person from the previous lifetimes. Because we are considering the previous lifetimes, we can place them in a certain tendency, but that doesn't mean that they're locked in there. There's no thing that a son of a Brahmana born into a Brahmana family stays a Brahmana. But if the tendency is Brahmanic, if you notice it by astrology, we put them into that category. And if later on they choose not to continue, even though they had previous tendencies from their previous lifetimes, if they chose not to continue in that path, they can always switch out to a different Varna. That's the right Vedic way, he says. Plato is unaware of the continuity of the soul. He could not understand. Socrates split soul and matter. He was able to differentiate. Plato did not. He thought they were both there together. So spiritual master. So Srila Prabhupada says another option is with the spiritual master. The spiritual master also assesses, and based on the tendency of the student, trains him in that line. This is the process of proper education. Plato's thought was, so this is education with Plato. Plato also had a democratic system of governance. In his mind, he said people will be qualified. Only those who qualify can take a post. And everybody has a chance to qualify. But we must find the most qualified person for each post. Srila Prabhupada says that's good, it's democratic. But do you know what is more democratic? Krishna consciousness. Even the lowest member of society is given a chance. And he pulls out this shloka. And he says, Chandalopi dvijashreshto haribhakti parayana haribhakti vihenascha dvijopi swapachatmada. Even if one is born in the family of a Chandala, dog eater, if one engages in devotional service, he becomes the best of Brahmanas. But even a Brahmana devoid of devotional service is on the level of the lowest dog eater. So if a person is advanced in devotional service, it doesn't matter where he was born, he becomes purified. So taking to devotional service is a process that purifies everybody and raises everybody up to the highest level. Samoham sarva bhuteshu. So now he represents the Lord's angle. He says, even from the Lord's side, if you think about it, this is what the Lord says. He says, Samoham sarva bhuteshu na me dveshyosti na para na priyaha ye bhajanti tumam bhaktya mahi te teshu chapyaham. So Bhagavad Gita 9:29, he says, I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. I am equal to all. But whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend. He is in me, and I am also a friend to him. So with these 2 shlokas, he covers this fact. And he says, social orders in state government. So he says, what is the purpose of having a social order, varnas? And what is the use of a government? So Plato is talking about governance, right? So he says, what is all the purpose? Ultimate purpose is to make everyone Krishna conscious. In a proper society, everybody, so if you have a Krishna conscious society, says Srila Prabhupada, in that kind of a society, everybody can come to the temple. They come together as equals, they take prasadam, they hear the spiritual instructions. And how will they contribute? The Brahmanas contribute with their intelligence, the Kshatriyas with their charity, the Vaishyas with fruit, milk, and grain, and the Sudras offer their labor. And with such joint effort, with a common goal, everybody can attain Krishna consciousness. This would be an ideal society. I think this is the last one, I should say, second last. So Plato talks about the allegory of a group of representatives being chained in a dark cave. So this is page 21. He brings up this allegory. It's very famous. It's there in his book, The Republic. And Plato describes representatives of humanity who are chained in a dark cave, and they are only able to see the shadows that are caused by the light of a fire. So they've never gone out, never seen the sun, never seen the outside world. They stay there, and all they know is the fire. And from the fire, whatever light comes, from that they see the shadows around them, and that is their overall understanding. One person from the group breaks free and sees the outside world. Then he comes back inside the cave to tell the people who are living there in darkness about the world outside. The bright world with the sun and everything is bright and glowing. But the people in the darkness, the cave dwellers, consider that he's crazy. They cannot understand or accept what he's trying to say. And hearing this, Srila Prabhupada says, this reminds me of the story of Dr. Frog. So Srila Prabhupada has a story where a frog is in a deep well. So let's read that. The story of Dr. Frog is that there's a frog that has never gone out of his dark well. So he thinks, here is everything. And then one day, another frog comes and tells him about the vast Atlantic Ocean. He says, oh, this big ocean, so big, and there's so many fishes, there's Timingla, there's so many things in there, so huge. But the frog says, so is it as big as this well? Is it twice the size of the well? Is it as big as the lake? He cannot get to a point where he can actually comprehend the vastness of such a water body. And in this way, he says, sometimes those who are in the dark well of the material, why are we bringing this analogy? It's an explanation that those who are in the dark well of this material life, they cannot even understand the light that is outside. And Srila Prabhupada says the saddest part of the story is when a man fallen inside this well shouts, I have fallen into this well, please save me. And somebody from outside, a man, drops a rope and says, just hold on to this rope and I will pull you out. But no, the fallen man has no faith in the man outside and does not catch hold of the rope. Similarly, we are here telling everybody, he says, you are suffering. Take up this Krishna consciousness and all your suffering will be relieved. But unfortunately, people refuse to catch hold of the rope. They do not even admit that they are suffering, says Srila Prabhupada. But only the fortunate catch the rope of Krishna consciousness. And the spiritual master is then able to pull them out. So how lucky are we, how auspicious is our life that we have been able to come to Krishna consciousness and we have the opportunity to catch that rope and start our journey back out into the light. Last person in our list is Aristotle. Oh, I'm all out of time. Is Aristotle, and Aristotle is a leading student of Plato. So we see this, it's kind of like the parampara, right? it's flowing down, but it's not quite. As you can see, they're not transferring information as it is. They absolutely don't have any concept of passing it down. Each is thinking his own thoughts and modifying according to his personal experience and his understanding. So Aristotle, what did he do? Aristotle constructed so he was the teacher of Alexander the Great, who was also Plato's leading student, but he was also the most confused of all three. Aristotle constructed a whole system of abstract principles and notions. He thought of the cosmos as a kind of hierarchy, where at the bottom was pure matter, and as you went up to the top was God. So in this, he says, higher up the scale, the more form predominated over matter. So he started thinking about this. He's speculating. And Srila Prabhupada says, by speculation, Aristotle may have known something about God, but our point is that we can know everything about God from God himself. What is the purpose of these philosophies? I've got the answer. I'm holding it here. We have it straight from God. Why do we have to speculate? He says, what we have is not just like a religion. He says, we have the best process by which to know God. It's very nicely said, because when we say Krishna consciousness is the best process to know God, it can be used by any religion. It's Sanatana Dharma, right? It is the original dharma of every soul. So when we give it out there, when people ask, you're the Hare Krishna religion, so we're not, we're process. We're process by which we know God. Hare Krishna consciousness is a process. It's the best process by which to know God. And he pulls up Bhagavad Gita 7.1. He says, Shri-Bhagavan Vacha, Maya Sakta Manappartha Yogam Yunjan Madashaya Asamshayam Samagramam Yatha Nyasyasi Tachunu. Now here, O son of Pritha, Arjuna, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free without doubt. So this is the point that Srila Prabhupada pulls up. He says, we may speculate and think about it on our own, and that helps. But just like, remember Plato's example, just like we contemplate the sun in darkness, we can speculate. But the best process is to come into the sunlight and see for ourselves. This is Aristotle was speculating. He understood a little bit, but most of it he missed. Best is to come and take to this process because we have it straight from God himself. Aristotle, let's see what Aristotle did. He goes on, he creates a whole new idea about form and matter. He picks up form and matter, and by his observation and inquiry, he speculates that any substance is composed of form and matter. Okay? Form, he says, is the essence of a substance. It's actuality. Matter is that which has not yet formed. It's not actualized. It has a potential to develop, but hasn't. So it's imperfect and not fully realized. God is all form, pure and perfect. Man is part form, part matter, imperfect, not fully realized. This is his understanding. Srila Prabhupada says, this is complete nonsense. Srila Prabhupada says, that is nonsense. Man is not made of matter. He is covered by matter. He is made of spirit. Srila Prabhupada says, what is this form and matter? Part form, part matter. Sounds, biggest problem with logic is that if we allow our mind to work on it for too long, it'll all sound logical. We don't want logical. We want to stick to what we got from Krishna himself. We want to stick to parampara and what we get from parampara. Srila Prabhupada, however, has no confusion. He says, this is nonsense. Man is not made of matter. He's covered by matter. He is made of spirit. Man is spirit, just as God is spirit. Man is made in the image of God. The Bible itself says that. So he says, he brings in the Bible and says, even the Bible says man is made in the image of God. So if God is perfect, so is man. Man was originally perfect too. How is he not perfect now? He's not perfect because he has fallen into a diseased condition. And this diseased condition is not his inherent imperfection, but an external one. So he's explaining that even when he is diseased, he's still perfect on the inside. It just has to be cleaned. The disease has to be eradicated. So Aristotle criticized the separation of matter and form by Plato. Plato said matter is different, form is different, right? He was able to take the spiritual from the material and separate it. Aristotle didn't like that. He said matter and form, he said his evaluation of them was similar to Plato. He said matter was unknowable, unintelligent, and no intrinsic worth. Form alone was real, unchanging, and enduring. But he didn't quite accept Plato's philosophy. So he continues on in this process, and Srila Prabhupada says, if you say that form is everything, then that means that the Supreme Absolute Truth should have a form, right? He's refuting. He says this person, Aristotle, is saying that, God is form. If he's form, then he should be a person, right? If he has a form. Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. He says Vigraha means form. Not a dead form, but an activating spirit. Krishna's form is Satchit Ananda. Ours is not. So that's the difference. Krishna's form is Satchit Ananda. Form, not Krishna himself, the form. Our form is not. So for Aristotle goes into this concept of form and matter in great detail. He starts off getting confused and he continues to get confused. He says, Aristotle says, form gives things purpose. All matter has to have some form in it. So in short, nature is driven by purpose. So everything around us has purpose. And the purpose is what gives it its actuality. Srila Prabhupada says that's true. But our form is decided by our karma. It's not just accidental that there's some form, there's some matter. Nobody can escape their karma. Whatever is your karma, that is your form. There is a process to evolution. From the lower forms, we pass all the way up until we get to the human form of life. When we reach the human form of life, it becomes a special opportunity. It's a special opportunity for us to understand our proper duty and to revive our lost relationship with God. You can return to God again at this point, or again return to endure the repeated cycle of birth and death. This is your choice. In the process of evolution, this is what happens. And he gives the example, yes, Indra Gopam Atavendra Mahusva Karma, Bandhan Rupa Palabhajana Matanoti, Karmani Nirdhati Kintu Chapakti Bhajam, Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. So it's Brahma Samhita 554. And that is his example that whoever you are, whatever you are still bound by these rules. He impartially ordains for each the due enjoyment of the fruits of one's activities, of all those who walk in the path of work in accordance with the chain of their previously performed works. No less in the case of a tiny insect than the case of Indra, the king of Devas. So everybody is bound by their karma. And the material form, your form is based on your karma. Remember, God's form is perfect. Yours is based on your karma. Just like you can only buy the clothes that you can afford. So whatever karma you've accumulated, whatever it affords you, that is the form you'll get. In all cases, however, the material form is never perfect because it's passing through these six changes, right? It's born, it grows, it sustains, it reproduces, then it diminishes, and gradually it vanishes. So in this process, this form is changing, and when the form vanishes, it returns back, all the various elements just return back to nature. Srila Prabhupada explains this is how it goes. Aristotle saw hierarchy even in the forms. He said the lower minerals, then plants, then animals, up to God. But he says there is no guarantee that just because you're changing forms, you will go in that process or no. So everybody starts lower mineral and goes into God. That's not an assured guarantee. And first of all, minerals is not even in that list, because we understand it's not marginal at all. It's lower energy. So he's very confused. And then Aristotle talks, last thing is that God is an unmoved mover, perfect, wanting nothing, and he's fully actualized. That Srila Prabhupada agrees. He says God is perfect. He has totally 6 opulences, and he has all of them in totality: wealth, fame, wisdom, strength, beauty, and renunciation. And because he's a perfect person, and a perfect person can rule others, he is perfect and therefore the supreme ruler. So that point he agrees. So Aristotle defines God as a pure form or actuality without matter or potentiality. But form without matter means thought. He says, remember the distinction: matter is the lowest, form is the highest, God is pure form. So it's a lot of philosophy, right, today? That's what I'm saying. It's very difficult to go through the book like that. You can only do the Greek philosophers. So there's God who's pure form, and matter, which is dull matter at the lowest level. This is the God is pure form, right? So he says form without matter is just thought. So he thinks of God as thought. He said so he envisioned God to be mind or intellect. A divine life is the life of the mind. He goes completely off track. He says God's activity was thought, and the sole object of his thought is himself. Noesis, noesisos. Thinking of thinking. His nature was self-contemplation. So he finally defines God. He has no form. He's just thought. And what is he thinking? He's thinking about thinking. The nature of God is he's thinking about his thinking. Srila Prabhupada says, if God simply sits and meditates, how is he any different from a stone? How is inactivity perfection? Krishna never meditates, says Srila Prabhupada. Yet when he speaks, he gives perfect knowledge. He fights with demons, plays with his friends, dances with the gopis. He has no need to self-contemplate. Aristotle recommends meditation to be perfect. That assumes that the person is imperfect in the beginning. So why should God meditate? It is for conditioned souls, not God. Parasya shaktir vivideya sruyate. Svabhaviki jnana bala kriyascha. So this comes from the Sveteshwara Upanishad 6.8. And in that it says the Supreme Lord has multipotencies which act so perfectly that all consciousness, strength, and activity are being directed solely by his will. He doesn't have to sit and contemplate anything. His disciples, Srila Prabhupada's disciples, say, what about Buddha? Buddha meditated. You said God doesn't need to meditate. So why did Buddha meditate? And Srila Prabhupada explains, Buddha's meditation was done with a purpose, to instruct those misbehaving people to sit down and meditate, rather than doing all this mischievous behavior. So he was passing on an instruction. He wasn't actually meditating. He has no need to meditate. He was doing it as a form of instruction. So we're almost done. If Aristotle did not tell us to end work, so he says, Aristotle didn't tell us to end work, but to contemplate. He says, even though he says God has no work, he's just sitting there, he doesn't tell us that. He says, spend your time in contemplation. And Srila Prabhupada says, yes, that is our process. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, Smaranam Padasevanam, Archanam Vandanam Dasyam, Sakyam Atmanivedanam. So this is our process. And in this process, as we keep going through it, we will advance in Krishna consciousness. And he also brings up Bhagavad Gita 6.47, Yoginam api sarvesham. So he says, he's bringing up all these points, and I'm wrapping it up by saying Aristotle speaks of God as not knowing changing things. So Aristotle the more I read, the more I realize he's really lost his way. He says God does not know about things that change, because if he did, it means he changes too. So God is completely unaware of the world, and he cannot reciprocate with our love. He actually doesn't care what happens to humanity, because he has nothing to do with the world that is changing. God moves the world by being an object of thought and desire. He doesn't actively participate. He's just more of a type of consciousness that has no object but itself. Remember, thinking about him thinking. Srila Prabhupada says, what kind of God is this? If one does not know about God, one should not speak. So Srila Prabhupada is pretty much fed up. He's like, of course God reciprocates. Sorry. He says, Ye yatham mam prapadyante tam sateva bhajamyaham. Nama vartamana vartante, Manushya partha sarvashah. Bhagavad Gita 4:11. Aristotle sounds like a Mayavadi. And he's wrapped it up. He says he's a Mayavadi, an impersonalist. When one does not have perfect knowledge, he has to speculate. God is all attractive. He attracts everybody. That is why he is God. God is totally unified. His thought and activity are the same. We are imperfect. When we think something, it may not happen. But when God thinks something, it will happen. Just as God wanted the battle of Kurukshetra, it happened. No one can check what God decides. Whether you choose to help him or not, it is going to happen. It is your choice to become a vessel or an instrument in his service. So, Srila Prabhupada says Aristotle had some vague idea about God, but not a clear understanding of who God was or even his personality. So, in this way, we've covered these three Greek philosophers and we've seen Western philosophy from a certain angle today. And as we go through this understanding, we come back to the explanation that Srila Prabhupada gave us that, individual speculation is not really the greatest path. It's like taking your car and starting to drive from San Francisco to New York and ending up in Mississippi or Seattle instead. You're going, you never know when you've lost your way because there's no one to guide you, there's no one to tell you. No one actually knows the route to New York anyway. So I'm reminded of the expression of the blind people describing an elephant. And the one who touched the trunk, the feet said, oh, it's a tree, it's like a trunk. Another guy touched the nose, it's a long rope. Ultimately, nobody got a full picture of an elephant because nobody could see. And in that way, sometimes philosophers get lost in their understanding. It was a wonderful opportunity for us to look into Western philosophy. It was a great opportunity to see what is it that Socrates, Aristotle, Plato taught. But if you notice, there were so many imperfections and they got lost along the way. It's very easy to get lost along the way. So rather than be blind and search, it would be so much easier if sitting in the blind well, dark well of material life, we stretch our hands out and with a little bit of trust, hold on to the rope of Krishna consciousness and let Guru and the Vaishnavas pull us out. So that's what I would like to wrap up with. Today, this was the topic. We've done the book Beyond Illusion and Doubt. This is the book. And we've only done the first three in a set of 15. Krishna willing, if opportunity arises, we will cover more. But it was a real eye-opener for me. I learned a lot. More than anything, I realized how grateful I am, how precious is this opportunity to be in the descending path, in the parampara, to receive the instructions straight from Krishna, rather than blindly looking around and losing my way. So I hope you will also try the book. Thank you so
Mataji,
much.
this was written by Srila Prabhupada?
This is not a book that was written. This is a collection of conversations, dialogues that were between Srila Prabhupada and his disciples, room dialogues on Western philosophy. He covered it over time. So I'm assuming that his disciples read the philosophy, brought it to him. And as they talked about the philosophy, Prabhupada gave his commentary on that philosophy based on bhakti. And once they used these to make a few, they did a few articles of this in the Back to Godhead, then they finally collated everything into a book. So this is the collation of that.
Nice, this is nice.
Yeah. I really, initially I was very hesitant to take it because it's philosophy and I don't have much of a heavy background on philosophy. But then I thought, it's not important that we know philosophy, it's important that we know bhakti. Because Srila Prabhupada is trying to explain to us how bhakti is so valuable, so precious, such a wonderful opportunity, and how it overthrows everything so very easily. And more than anything, the most important takeaway from this today's discussion is basically the thought that individual speculation, I will find my way myself. It's not it's not the right option. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Mataji.
Yes, Mataji.
Yeah, I have this was an excellent class. And of course, I can understand at that time, those he's talking, Prabhupada is talking to, they already were familiar with the Greek philosophy and of course, not at all with Vedic philosophy. So he had to kind of explain, you have to start somewhere. So he started with that and had to was trying to explain how bhakti is different and how it is kind of, you should be taking that. My only concern about this is I never read this book, and of course, I'm so glad that you brought it up today. I'm going to get it and read it. But anyways, my question is like, I cannot forget about, or I cannot not think about what's happening in the world right now. Like if you think about Russia and Ukraine, Prabhupada has disciples both places, and but here he has not gone up to, or maybe he has and you haven't covered it. That the only reason we actually hear about Aristotle is because he was Alexander the Great's advisor.
Yes.
And Alexander the Great followed Aristotle. So, but we do not have, somehow we have disciples, but we do not seem to have the people who seem to have the power to start these wars. I don't know who is right, who is wrong, whether it's Krishna's, just like Kurukshetra. Maybe it is Krishna's doing now also. I'm sure everything is Krishna's doing, but it's hard to understand why that is happening. And how can we reach the persons in charge? Because that's where I'm not sure they're getting the right message or not, because it seems
Very
like,
true. It's a constant concern for a lot of people, especially in the world that it is today. Mothers are concerned for their children. People are concerned for their country. There's so many things that we have to concern. But I'm reminded of a few points that I hope might help. One was when Srila Prabhupada was being told, remember that when Srila Prabhupada was on this planet and he was there, we were having this, US was having this Cuban Missile Crisis, I think at that time, if I'm not wrong. There was some issue where they were always worried that there might be a missile launch. And everybody was on
Vietnam.
very
Vietnam War.
Vietnam War. Okay, so no, there was a missile strike they were expecting, and they were saying, Prabhupada, what will we do? And Prabhupada said, just chant. This body is temporary anyway. One day we're giving it up, right? Just focus on chanting. And if the missile falls, it falls. We move on. And for us right now, when we see the pain and the struggle and everything happening out there, this doesn't make the connection. I totally understand that, because I have gone through stages in my life where sometimes philosophy feels there's a disconnect between philosophy and the reality, but that's because of our mind. My mind is in a state where it's unable to accept the elevated state of the philosophy. We're not able to detach ourselves. We become what's happening around us becomes personal, and then the philosophy may not apply because the mind is working over the intelligence. The intelligence is not working over the mind, and this I understood because at a certain point later on, when the mind calmed down and the intelligence woke up again, I realized the philosophy made sense. It didn't make sense when my mind was in charge. So because of the mind's fluctuation and there's a lot of ego involved because it's personal for me. And also this need to help others is a very natural need. But Srila Prabhupada says the only help we can truly give a person is to help the soul, not the body. So even though we do make sure that everybody is well fed, like all the Krishna temples, we focus on feeding everybody, giving them adequate prasadam is our focus. It's not just food, we're trying to give them prasadam. Because prasade sarva dukkhanam hanirasya upajayate. And the same way, we need to feed the soul, which is we try to give them Krishna consciousness. It is a deep, dark well, material life. The most challenging thing for us is to understand that when we are sitting here happy in this room, we are still suffering. We don't have to be in a war zone being bombed to know that we are suffering. And it's our own illusion to think that we are suffering less and others are suffering more, or others are suffering less, we are suffering more. Everybody is suffering. So Srila Prabhupada says, instead of thinking about the suffering, think about how to alleviate the overall suffering. Living in this material world, dukkhalayam shashvatam, is always suffering. And he also talks about this idea. I remember when the Devas came up to Vishnu and asked him, there was an upheaval, and they came up to Vishnu and they asked him, we've lost our power, we lost our position. And Vishnu says, just sit quietly. Right now, it is their turn to be at the top. So when reading that, I'm sorry to give you a reference without point of access, but that is, I remember that very distinctly because I remember Vishnu himself saying, sit down and wait. Now is not your time. Now it is their time, because I remember they lost, these guys had lost their Guru Brihaspati, and Asuras, they had served their Guru very well, so they were on top. and the Devas were down. And Vishnu said, sit quietly, it's not your time. Sometimes it happens, there are reversals, and we have to wait. We have to patiently wait. If the Lord could say that, then it must be true, right? Sometimes there are reversals. The good is not always on top. Sometimes things rotate. We have to wait patiently for things to straighten up again. And in the process, like we said, we have to focus on the soul rather than the body, and do as much as we can to alleviate everybody's suffering in total. I hope that helps, Mataji. I know that it's a very difficult time for people, and it's there's a lot of frustration in being unable to help people in this kind of situation. But philosophy really helps. Krishna consciousness helps. It's just a matter of realization.
Mataji, this is Ashray Madhav Das. I was just thinking we can also look at it from another perspective. These kind of events which is happening and all the suffering in the world, war or no war, it actually gives us impetus that to take the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission to have holy name in every town and village. Because when that happens, then people's heart will change, they will elect the right leaders, or they will, at least there is a higher chance of having leaders who are also peaceful. And so there will be less this kind of situation. So we have to take this mission very aggressively, looks like.
Yeah, it's the same concept that difficulties are opportunities, right? A challenge somewhere becomes an opportunity for something else. Just like we read in the Gita, 4 types of people approach the Lord, and some are in suffering. That's why they approach. Some approach because they're curious. Some approach because they're naturally in the mode of goodness. They want to know Him. And in this way, we have all these different varieties of people who approach Him. And this is an opportunity for people to approach the Lord. So they become conducive to the philosophy. They're willing to trust the hand that drops the rope, so to speak. So hopefully, we will be able to spread Krishna consciousness more, and also take it as a personal motivation to remember that life is so short and the opportunity we're given is so little, that we hold on to every opportunity and every moment that we get and use it wisely. So happy to be with all of you. I think I've gone way over the time today, so sorry. I hope you like the book. I'm very happy that you want to get it, Ruby Mataji. So nice. It's been a great journey just finding these books and reading them. So I hope I can continue to do that. Thank you so much for attending and listening to today's Wednesday lecture. Hare Krishna.